All right, so I'm going to see if this is working. Yeah. Okay, looks like it is. Looks like that's working. So let's go to the right slide. So today we're going to talk about corporate social responsibility, and then I know you're going to be a little heartbroken. I have a committee meeting that I have to go to, so I'm going to have to let you go a little early. We should be able to get through this fairly quickly. Again, if you feel cheated by that, you just let me know, and next Tuesday we can stay late. Also, this week, after we finish corporate social responsibility, your first exam is due. So since we're a little bit behind, we were supposed to finish CSR last time. We're going to finish today. I'll give you until I think next Tuesday at midnight to complete the exam. So the first exam, since we're just talking about CSR today. But we should be on track after that. We should be caught up in the schedule. So you can just proceed from there. But we should be finished with this today, and we'll finish a little bit early. One of the versions of your textbook, I don't think it's the current version, had Walmart as a case study, and I kept this as a case study because Walmart is one of my favorite companies to hate. I live in Guthrie, so we don't have a Target, and even if we did have a Target, I doubt I would shop there. When I used to live in Edgemere, which is in Oklahoma City, down south of the church that is no longer there, the Dome Church on 36th. How many of you remember that? It looked like a lady part, this big dome. They've torn it down. I lived just south of that church, and my neighbors, who were sort of yuppie scum, insisted that they only shopped at Target because it was not that much more expensive than Walmart. So I did an experiment to prove to them that it was. And I went shopping one week at Walmart and saved all my receipts. And then I went shopping the next week and bought the same stuff at Target. And it was like $35 more expensive. Now, if you're doing that every week, that adds up to a lot of money. And so I would go to Walmart because it's cheap, but it's a miserable experience. The closest Walmart to me when I lived in Edgemere was at Belle Isle, and that's a really interesting Walmart because it's right between Nichols Hills and Crown Heights and Edgemere, and it's also got tons and tons and tons of homeless people in that area. So it's kind of a very odd hodgepodge of people, but it's a miserable experience. Now, I live in Guthrie now. I moved back when I got my PhD after I completed it in New Mexico State. I moved back to my hometown, Guthrie. And it's more pleasant to go to the Guthrie Walmart because there are fewer people, but it's still not the greatest experience on the planet because there's always these Yeti that are in there. I found evidence for the Yeti, and they're in the Guthrie Walmart with all their Yeti children. And it's horrible. I hate going. Walmart started out as, I think, a company that had a lot of corporate social responsibility when Sam Walton founded the store. So Sam Walton starts Walmart. He didn't actually start retail with a Walmart store. He was born in Kingfisher, Oklahoma, by the way, which is just about 30 miles west of Guthrie in Kingfisher County. So you can go straight out 33 and you hit Kingfisher, and his family moved to Arkansas. He initially bought a Ben Franklin, which was a 5 and dime store. And his landlord noticed that he was making a good little profit on this 5 and dime store and thought that would be a perfect thing for his son-in-law to get involved. So he didn't renew Sam's lease on the 5 and dime, and he had to move his store somewhere else. He's one of the first people that started selling flip-flops. He found these at a show, like I think at a market show, and I think it was New York. I may be wrong on that, but I think it was New York. And he realized that these were like perfect for Southerners. They would just love them. Nobody else was buying them. He bought a ton of them and just put them out on a big end cap in his store, which he then at that time was called Walton's, I think, and then it later became Walmart. But as long as Sam was alive and he was running the store, he really focused on, I think, having a very ethical environment for his employees. He didn't call them clerks or things like that. Everybody was an associate, and they gave stock grants out to their employees. And there were lots of people who became very wealthy in those days of working for Walmart, and they could have a good retirement based on the stock. After he died, Walmart, became a behemoth, and they started focusing more on the bottom, the financial bottom line, rather than what we'll call the triple bottom line. Walmart, in some respects, after Sam dies, and actually when he was still alive, they did some things that were unique in the distribution chain. So one of the things that Walmart has done, because they have such huge buying power, and I think this is no longer true because of Amazon. I put on the slide that they're the largest retailer of socks, toothpaste, guns, textiles, and diamonds. Most of you probably didn't realize that Walmart is the largest retailer in terms of actual volume sold of diamonds. Amazon is, I think, competing with them in some of these categories and becoming larger in some of the categories, but they're still a behemoth. And because of their size and their purchasing power, they were able to reverse the flow of power in the distribution chain. Historically, all of the power in the distribution chain started with the manufacturer of a product, because the manufacturer of products set the initial price, and that drove the price through the rest of the logistics. All of these people that were middlemen that take a cut and add price to the bottom line of what consumers actually pay. Well, Walmart got so big and they became so powerful that they were able to go to the manufacturers and start saying, this is what we will pay, and we're not going to pay any more for this product. And they were able to do it because they just had the sheer volume. And there was an article that came out about 10 years ago called "The Man Who Said No to Walmart." And it was about a lawnmower company called Snapper. What do you want to guess Walmart wants to sell a lawnmower for? What do you think Walmart sells the average price of a lawnmower for? Or at the time, what they wanted? It's gone up because of inflation, but at the time that Snapper said no, what do you think Walmart was selling lawnmowers for? Or at the time Snapper said no?
Like a full-size lawnmower?
Not a ride, just a push mower, like just what do you think they were selling? What do you think their price point was that they wanted to sell a lawnmower for? That's it. That's exactly correct. Get a duck. Exactly. They wanted to sell lawnmowers for $100. They figured out that that's what their consumer wanted to pay for a lawnmower. Snapper made quality lawnmowers, or higher quality lawnmowers. They couldn't sell a lawnmower for $100. So they actually said no, because Walmart said, we're going to pay you, $50 for a lawnmower. And Snapper said no, because if they're going to pay 50, they're going to mark it up to 100, right? And Snapper said no. Eventually, Snapper came around, and they have met Walmart's price. Now, I'm not sure that you get the same quality of lawnmower that you used to get. So if you're selling lawnmowers for $100, what's happening to most of the lawnmowers? So the average Walmart customer wanted to pay about $100 for a lawnmower. I used to mow, my family's yards when I was a kid. That was one of the things that I was responsible for, was mowing the yards at our bed and breakfast. That's what I grew up in my family's business and worked for them. And I can tell you that a $100 lawnmower breaks after a year, right? You spend $100. You're lucky if you get 2 seasons out of it, but that's not what Walmart customers are interested in. They want to pay about $100 for a lawnmower. If you want to get a good lawnmower that's going to last you a long time, you buy a Honda, and for a push mower, you're going to pay $500 for that. That's not what they wanted to sell at Walmart. So Walmart has changed the power distribution, and for consumers, that may be a good thing. How else have they managed to keep prices low? Well, one of the things that they've done to keep prices low is their labor practices are highly suspect. Many people who work for Walmart until recently, as a result of COVID and the power shifting in the employment chain and shifting back towards employees as opposed to the employer, they're actually having to pay more and pay a living wage. And I think Walmart now starts their associates at or close to $15 an hour. But for a long time, they didn't. They paid minimum wage, which meant that a lot of their employees were actually eligible for food stamps. So who was actually subsidizing Walmart's employees? The taxpayer. And they were eligible. They stopped paying. So again, when Sam was running Walmart, they had good health insurance benefits. Well, they stopped all of that. And until the Affordable Care Act came along and said, even part-time people, if they work so many hours and you have so many employees, are going to get paid and going to be eligible for benefits under your plan, they had cut out. They refused to hire most associates in full-time capacity because before the Affordable Care Act, they could get away with not paying those employees benefits, like health insurance. Now that's changed somewhat. That kept prices low, but what did it mean? Again, who was subsidizing Walmart employees? So the tragedy in this country is that if you were very wealthy before the Affordable Care Act, and this is not a political statement, it's just a statement of fact, that before the Affordable Care Act, the wealthy had health insurance because they could afford to pay for it, and the poor had health insurance. It's called Medicaid. And most of Walmart's part-time employees were eligible for Medicaid. So again, who is subsidizing Walmart's cheap employees? Well, the taxpayer by providing Medicaid to these people. So by keeping them part-time, now this is no longer the case after the Affordable Care Act, they were able to reduce their costs such that they could be everyday low prices, right? That was their slogan for a long period of time, was these everyday low prices. But again, a lot of these practices are really ethically suspect because they are putting the burden back on the taxpayer because they're not paying living wages and they weren't providing the benefits that a company their size should be providing. So what is corporate social responsibility then? Well, the classic model of corporate social responsibility is rooted in the free market neoclassical economic theory and proposed by Milton Friedman. Now, Friedman was an economist at the University of Chicago, and he said that businesses' only ethical obligation was to make a profit. That's it. That's the only ethical obligation that they had, was to make a profit. As long as you abided by the law, you were acting within what he considered to be ethically sound practices. Here, I'm like wondering where the noise is coming from. It's from the narrated PowerPoint. I just realized that. Hopefully it didn't get picked up on the mic. And hopefully when I turn that down, it doesn't affect. I'm gonna look at this just real quickly to make sure that it's still, we've got sound. All right, test. We've got sound. Okay, yeah, we do. All right, test. So it's grounded really in property rights and the legal theory of property rights. And the idea is that governments should take a laissez-faire approach to business and allow the free market to determine what it is that is going to sell and who's going to succeed and who's going to fail, right? We in the United States, more than any other nation on earth, love the idea of property. In fact, when I used to teach American national government, I used to have my students write a paper called My American Dream. And what is the essence of the American dream for most people? Well, it's that they want to own a house. That's the essence of the American dream for lots of people. They want to own a house. And in theory, when you buy your house, how many of you own a house? Anybody own a house? No, I usually have one or two that own a house. You own from the surface all the way to the heavens and all the way to the center of the earth, in theory. Now, in reality, those mineral rights may have been severed, and you may not own all the way to the heavens because you can't stop airplanes from flying over your house. Now you can own as much as you can use, although you can sell airspace rights now as part of property rights in a lot of places, and they do that. They sell airspace so that you can ensure that you still have a view. It became very popular in California, particularly in the hills above California, to buy airspace rights over other people so that they couldn't build up and destroy your view. So it's grounded in this theory of property. Well, what is property? Property, some things that you may think of as being property are not, and some things that you might not think of as being property are. Property is defined by the sovereign. In the United States, where does sovereignty rest? So in places like Great Britain, sovereignty lies in the embodiment of the monarch. The monarch is the sovereign. That's not who's sovereign in the United States. Who's sovereign in the United States? The people. We the people. Who said that? You can get a deck. That's correct. We the people are sovereign in the United States. That which the sovereign grants, the sovereign can take away. So through legislation, we grant certain types of property rights, and we can also take those away. So what's an example of something that is not property that you probably think of as being property, but it's not? So what makes something property? Property has 3 characteristics, and these characteristics are A, E, and D. Add. So what are these 3 characteristics? Well, the first characteristic is it's alienable. What does that mean? It means that during your lifetime, you can sell it. You can give it away. You can abandon it. And that's all perfectly legal. So, many years ago, when Craigslist first got going, Craigslist really became a very creepy website. I mean, you could buy all sorts of stuff on Craigslist. And there was a big article that was written about the creepiness of Craigslist, and there was a person that was offering their virginity for sale on Craigslist. That's not property, because you can't do that. It's illegal. That's called prostitution. Your body is not property. You may think it is, but it's you can't sell your organs. That's creepy. You can't leave your body, I mean, there are laws about what you can do when you're dead. You can't stuff your body and have it put up in the corner of your house. That's creepy. Can't be done. So you can give it away, sell it, abandon it during your lifetime. It is descendable. And divisible. Drew a blank there. So the 2 Ds deal with what happens to your property when you're dead. You can either, through your will, leave it to people. So you can leave your house, your car, your stuffed beanie bag collection, whatever. Or if you die intestate, it will descend through the intestacy statutes to your heirs. People have heirs apparent while they're alive. Living people don't have heirs. They have heirs apparent. You only have real heirs when you die. And if you die intestate without a will, the court is going to determine how your stuff gets given away. And in Oklahoma, we do that per stirpes, which is by the roots. So if you have Wife and kids, basically it goes to your spouse and your children. If you don't have a wife and kids, it goes to your parents if they're living. If your parents are not living, it goes to your siblings and so on and so forth through the roots. So it's alienable, divisible, and descendable. So we love more than any other country on earth property, the idea of property rights in this country. And the idea is, according to Friedman, all you have to do is look at the property rights, and if you have a right to sell it, so what's, again, not property? Well, your cocaina is not property, right? The cocaine is not property. Now, it's an interesting question as to whether or not marijuana is property. The state of Oklahoma says it is. The federal government says it's not, right? So things that we can touch, we generally think of as being property, but they're not necessarily. You can't legally sell your cocaine. Now people do, but if those contracts are unenforceable, right? Between you and a drug dealer, that's not an enforceable contract in a court of law. So just because you can touch it doesn't make it property. And then some of the things that you can't touch that you probably don't think of are also property. So what's an example of things that you can't touch that are property? Copyright. That's property. You write something, you write a book, a song, things like that, you have property rights in that. And the copyright law tells you how long you have property rights in that. If you invent something, so copyright applies to non-useful stuff. If you invent something that's useful, you can get a patent in that, and that's a property right. Now that will extinguish far faster and go into the public sphere than copyright does. Copyright generally lasts for the life of the author plus a set term of years. And so, but patent lasts from the time of application. It starts at the moment of application. Even if you get it, it doesn't extend it, and it lasts for a set number of years. That's like drugs. Drug manufacturers come up with not drugs as in the cocaina or the marijuana, but in terms of things like Propecia or new antibiotics. Those are all patented and protected for a set number of years. The third great property right that you don't touch is called trademark and trade dress. And trademark and trade dress protect the holders of these things. And it's the one property right that doesn't extinguish. So you can hold a trademark for as long as your product doesn't become generic for an entire class of goods. Right? You can lose it if it becomes so. For example, Coca-Cola goes around and you go to the restaurant and you say, I'll have a Coke. And if they don't tell you, we serve Pepsi and they don't serve Coke, because Coke does not want to become generic for basically a carbonated, caramelized, caffeinated beverage. They'll sue you and say, you don't have Coke, you have Pepsi. We're switching over here at UCO from Coke to Pepsi. And why are we doing that, do you suppose? Pepsi actually has a larger market share, but more people prefer Coke. Even though Pepsi did this, the Pepsi challenge where this was really big when I was a kid growing up. They would give people like a blind taste test and they said people prefer Pepsi. There's a lot that's been written about that. People do prefer Pepsi for one, they would give you an ounce of it. And for one sip, people do prefer Pepsi over Coke, but they don't want a whole can of it. Why?
So much sugar?
It's too sweet. Yeah, you can get a duck. It's got too much sugar. It's enormously sweet compared to Coke. People actually prefer, for an entire 12 ounces, they prefer Coke. But Pepsi actually has larger market share. Why? Because Pepsi discounts a lot more. And so they're in a lot more places. They give you you get a better profit margin generally with Pepsi. Or at least historically you have. So this idea that Friedman has is that as long as I have a property right, my only obligation is to make money. Now, what's wrong with his theory? Well, first of all, again, that which the sovereign defines as property, the sovereign can take away. And so the sovereign can simply say it's no longer property. The second problem with this theory is that it fails to recognize the huge advantage that the sovereign confers on corporations. So when Mitt Romney was running for president against Barack Obama, somebody asked him about this, and politicians get into trouble when they speak the truth. So Mitt Romney was asked about corporations and they're not paying their fair share in taxes or something like that. He's like, corporations are people, my friend. And everybody laughed at him. But that's true. Corporations are legal people. They are legal entities. Everybody laughed and they're like, oh, he's an idiot. No, from a legal standpoint, he is correct. What does it mean that a corporation is a legal person? And the United States Supreme Court has said corporations are legal people. In Citizens United, that they have the same free speech rights that you or I have. So what does it mean that corporations are legal people? Well, it means that they can own property in their own name and they can sue and be sued in their own name. Now, why is this important? Because what corporate status gives you is enormous protection in the business world. It allows for the pooling of huge amounts of capital because the corporate status ensures that investors of the corporation can't be sued personally for the injuries that are caused by interactions of the corporation in the business sphere. What's an example of this? Ford manufactured this really crappy car called the Pinto. How many of you have heard of the Pinto? It was an enormously ugly, crappy vehicle. Let's see if I can find a picture of a Pinto. So this is it. This is the Ford Pinto, really ugly car. And they manufactured it really cheaply. The Pinto had what's called at law in the tort realm, a design defect. Anybody know what that design defect was? Yes.
It was, wasn't it, when they crashed, the fuel tank would like instantly explode?
Not a front crash, but yes, you're correct, you get a duck. So if you were hit from behind, if you slammed on your brakes and somebody hit you from behind, it would, the way they positioned the fuel tank, it was in such a manner that it was likely to explode because it would shove metal into the fuel tank, sparking, and the vehicle would go up in flames. Ford had actually figured out that, that because it was a cheap car, the average buyer of the Pinto was not a multimillionaire or even somebody who was like me, a lawyer. The average buyer were working class or lower class people. And so it was just cheaper to pay people off if they were injured in a car wreck than it was to recall all of the Pintos and fix the problem. They did a cost benefit analysis and they just figured out that it was cheaper to pay people off if they were injured in a crash, because actuaries will tell you what a life is worth. Now that's creepy, isn't it? It's creepy, but we do this. We calculate what a human life is worth. And actuaries will tell you that as of this moment right now, this is creepy to think about, that I'm worth more than you. Why? Well, you're students, you don't have a degree. I have a bachelor's, a master's, a Juris Doctorate, and a PhD. I make a lot of money because I have not only this nice little full-time job here at UCO, but I own a business on the side. And so, you know, I'm worth a lot of money. And you're not yet. But at some point in time, if you go into professional sales, for example, you may be worth more than I am. But that wasn't who the average Pinto buyer was. The average Pinto buyer was some guy that was working at a blue collar job and, you know, living paycheck to paycheck. Now, why is it that Ford could get away with doing this? Well, because of the idea of the corporation. Corporate status limits liability of investors to the amount of money they invest. So if I invest in Ford as a shareholder and Ford goes broke, or Chesapeake or any other corporation, I am only out the money. Now, it may be a substantial amount of money if they go broke, but I am only out the amount of money that I invested in that corporate entity. No more. You can't come after me personally or the officers and directors of Ford personally for torts that are committed on behalf of the corporation. Now, why is this important? Because what it does is it allows for the pooling of huge amounts of capital so that we can do things like build automobiles and build airplanes. We would not, if you had unlimited liability as a shareholder in a corporation, we would never have built things like any kind of car or any kind of airplane. Because the amount that you could be sued individually if we allow that would be so great. So why is this important and why does this go against what Milton Friedman? Well, Friedman says corporations have nothing but a profit motive. That's the only ethical thing to do. But corporations get enormous benefit in terms of the pooling of capital from the sovereign. And as a result of that, because you're given this enormous advantage, you should, in my opinion, also have an enormous amount of responsibility that goes along with that. And we are seeing more and more corporations becoming more and more interested in the ethical models of corporate social responsibility. So what are the criticisms of the classical model? Well, it doesn't take into account externalities or market failures. What are externalities or market failures? These are things that are not the intended consequence, but they are byproducts of much of corporate development. So for example, what's an externality of the oil and natural gas industry? Well, it degrades things like air quality, and we all suffer as a result of those externalities, those market failures. It leads to the damagement of public goods. This is what's called, in game theory, the tragedy of the commons. And there used to be a game that highlighted this. It's since been taken down online. It was called the Tragedy of the Bunnies. And so there's two versions of the game. In the first version, you have all of these bunnies that are out on a field, and you are a bunny broker. Now, you're playing against the computer, and since all of the bunnies are out on this field, your incentive is to see if you can grab bunnies faster than the computer to make a profit. At the end of that round, what happens? Well, because you and the computer grab all of the bunnies and sell them, there are no bunnies left at the end of that round. So in the second round, or second version of the game, what they do is they have bunnies fenced off, and you can only grab and sell bunnies that are in your fenced off property. Well, what happens at the end of round 2 of the game? Most bunny brokers still have bunnies left over because you want, bunnies produce more bunnies and you want the bunnies. So you're going to protect those resources. Well, in many instances, these things like free water, clean water, and clean air are not things that we can protect. They're public goods. they're not things that we can protect easily without government regulation of those industries that cause pollution. So this, actually, the tragedy of the commons is highlighted by what happened in lots of places, lots of towns across America. There was this phenomenon. You can still go to this place in New York City. There used to be a sheep pasture in the middle of New York City where people could graze. It's part of Central Park now. And there's a very famous restaurant in that area called Tavern on the Green, which closed for some time and has now been, I think, reopened. It's a sort of a New York landmark restaurant. And that was actually the sheep pasture. And anybody could take their sheep and put them out there in the sheep pasture. Well, what happens to the sheep pasture after a while? What do sheep do? Well, they denude. Sheep are like goats. They'll eat just about anything. And before you know it, what you've got is you've got a dry lot where the sheep have destroyed all of the pasture. And so everybody suffers as a result of the overgrazing. So because of these externalities, there's been a modified version of the classical model proposed by Norman Bowie. And he says that our first duty, and this is the first duty of ethics in many instances, primum non nocere, which means, first of all, do no harm. That's your first duty as a corporation. You should have, and we should impose these duties, according to Bowie, by law on corporations, because we give them this enormous advantage, which is the protection of their shareholders through the fiction of a legal person that stands to be the one that's liable. So first of all, we should say that they have an obligation to do no harm. Second is they should probably prevent harm. And third, which is less important maybe, according to Bowie, but we should encourage them to do good. Now, what are some corporations that do this? Well, Tom's, for example. 1 for 1. For every pair of shoes that you buy, they donate a pair of shoes. That's actually encouraging the good. Bombas is another company that's started. How many of you bought Bombas socks? They are actually pretty good socks. And they have a 1 for 1 because socks are the #1 most requested item in homeless shelters. So they have a 1 for 1. So they're encouraged to do good. Now, a lot of people would say, we can't really insist that they do this legally, but we should encourage it. And we should give them benefits to do it. First, do no harm. Don't actively put out products that are harming people like the Pinto. Second, you need to prevent harm. What's an example of preventing harm? Well, this is done by regulation through things called the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, OSHA, which says things like you got to have safety gear for people working in industries that are dangerous. You got to provide them with hard hats, for example, and steel-toed boots and things like that. If you're working in a warehouse or a factory where you might have exposure to instruments that could do you a lot of harm. And then third, we should encourage the good, but not require it legally, but we should encourage it. And how do we do that? Well, we can do that through incentivization of the tax code, and we do. For donating product, what do Tom's and Bombas get? Well, they get a tax write-off. It reduces the amount of corporate income tax they actually owe. So how do we go about doing this? Well, rather than looking at a shareholder theory, which was Bowie's idea, which is your sole goal as a corporation is to make money for your shareholders, we should employ a stakeholder theory. We have to recognize in a stakeholder theory that every decision affects a wide range of people. So when you're writing your exam for the first essay, you might want to talk about stakeholder theory. Every business decision affects a wide variety of people. Who does it affect? Well, it affects obviously the customers that buy products. I have yet to figure out how to turn the narrated PowerPoints off. It's also gonna affect your vendors and suppliers who rely on you for business, and it's gonna affect the community as a whole in many instances. So stakeholder theory rejects the idea that corporations stand in this privileged position and that all they can do is protect their shareholders. It's a claim that you have to have balance among the competing claims. So when you're making business decisions, you have to be cognizant of the impact that your decision has, not only on your shareholders, but also your employees, your suppliers and vendors, your customers, and the community at large. There are criticisms of stakeholder theory. What are the criticisms? Well, one of the criticisms is how do you balance competing rights? Oftentimes, these different stakeholders have different and competing ideas. And so how do you balance that? And stakeholder theory doesn't give us a good idea of how we should balance it. But I think one of the things that you can do is you can look at, first of all, are we doing no harm? And second, are we preventing harm to people? And a lot of people say that it provides little practical advice. Again, I think this criticism, like the criticism of virtue ethics, is a little overstated because I think it does. It just says, look, we have to recognize that our decisions impact a wide variety of people, and we should think about that. We should think about how it's going to impact people and come up with maybe something that resembles, a utilitarian approach, perhaps. Any questions about corporate social responsibility? Well, I got through that in record-breaking time. I'm letting you go really, really early. So again, if you feel cheated, you just let me know. And we'll stay late next Tuesday, and I'm gonna go to my tenure and promotion committee meeting. So if you got ducks today, come see me. And I will see you a week from today, and you have until midnight on Tuesday to a week from today to finish the first exam. How's that sound?